Sensitive data stolen from an NHS provider in a cyber attack has been apparently published online. NHS England say a criminal group claims it's released patient information hacked from Synovis, which provides pathology services on blood tests. Well, joining me now to discuss all of this, Graham Stewart, Head of Public Sector at Checkpoint Software. Thanks so much for joining us, Graham. What's your assessment of what we know about this attack so far?
So this forms what we're typically seeing more and more now. So public sector is increasingly being targeted around the world. And this is a three-pronged type attack. The first one is hack in, cause disruption. So you remember when the attack actually took place, you had problems with pathology services, doctors and nurses reduced to using paper trail, old school approach to delivering services out to patients. The second bit is the mass removal of personal data, and that then leads to this extortion threat. So that's them demanding a ransom for not publishing the data. The third bit that typically that happens here, and again, very typical in these sorts of attacks, they go after a supply chain partner. So that supply chain partner will be an external organization, typically in the private sector, or a joint organization with the public sector, and it'll be them that's actually targeted. And this is very typical of what we're seeing around the world.
So just take away the private sector partner aspect of this, first of all, because you said at the top that there's a growing number of hacks on public sector organizations. Is that a sort of sensible ploy from these hackers? I would guess that a public sector organization is less likely to pay a ransom because of all the sort of red tape around such a thing.
Yeah, so typically, if you put this in the context of sort of ransom being paid in another dimension, a different area, sort of ransom, terrorist, people getting kidnapped and things like that, governments around the world have a rule that says we will not pay the ransom, we do not engage. So one of the reasons why it makes sense potentially for people to go after a supply chain partner is because there's a business involved, and there are reports in previous hacks of private sector organizations actually paying. Now, in this particular instance, the organization has, to my mind, quite rightly said, we're not paying the ransom, we're not engaging.
In terms of the sort of easy nature or hard nature of making these attacks, is the NHS well protected? Is Synovis well protected? Was this a very clever hack, or should there have been better protection?
So I would say, having spent 25 years in working with colleagues in the NHS around security, the people there are absolutely amazing. One of the difficulties you have is the NHS is a very complex landscape. It's a federated organisation, so lots of different organisations. It's a question of the hackers being clever and finding a weak point in the armour of the organisation and pushing through there. So because of the complexity of the organisation, because of the sophistication of the attackers, there is sadly a sort of inevitability that not just in the UK but around the world, that healthcare public sector organisations are going to be targeted by these people.
In terms of sort of ransoms being demanded and these types of hacks going on, is it incredibly elevated, the amount of that going on, that we just don't talk about it that much because it doesn't come to light, or have, with the last couple of years, of people become a bit more aware and trying to stop this sort of thing, have they sort of tailed off again?
Well, again, the way to think of this is in terms of sort of traditional crime, as it were. There are gangs out there whose entire reason for existence is to extort money from organisations by hacking into them, with removing large amounts of personal data, which has value, and at absolute best, massive inconvenience for people, but potentially much worse. And so these people, this is their entire reason for existence. And these gangs operate all around the world, increasingly sophisticated as time goes on. And so one of the things it's important for organisations like the NHS, like their providers, is to make sure they're on top of their cybersecurity and make sure that they're actually patching and they're making sure that the holes where they find them, where they're available, are plugged, and make life incredibly difficult for these gangs. But there is, frankly, an economy in doing this. There is money to be made, and that's why they do it.
Graham Stewart, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.